collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, we meet Prime Minister Trudeau's special envoy for the European Union, who was in Cyprus recently to discuss federalism with people from both Cypriot communities.
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding between the two communities about what the other community wants. And if it was clarified, maybe they would discover that the gap between their views is not so huge. Maybe they are much closer to agree than what they think.
Australian and Cypriot experts sign a memorandum of understanding on road safety.
Drivers make mistakes. They often do. Most of the time they're compliant, or at least in my country I can say that most of the time they are compliant and they try to be. But we're humans and we make errors. So we need to be able to design a system that is the road structural system, the vehicles that people drive, and the speeds at which they drive and how we manage those speeds need to be set in such a way that if people do make mistakes, it doesn't cost their lives.
And in the 500th year since the death of Leonardo da Vinci, we talk to an Italian professor who applies his science to the art world.
And so I thought of something very simple, like a tablet or a table, that all you have to do is just wipe off with your fingers the image of the surface of the painting, and then layer after layer you just go inside the painting. You uncover, basically you go back in time and you see the genesis of the painting, starting from the support all the way to the surface.
Stéphane Dion, Prime Minister Trudeau's special envoy for the European Union and Europe, as well as the Canadian ambassador to Germany, was in Cyprus recently to discuss federalism with representatives of NGOs, journalists and policymakers from both the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot communities. As a professor of political science at the University of Montreal, Dion's research focused on Canadian federalism, and he organised and hosted the first international conference on federalism in October 1999. When I spoke to him after his roundtable discussion with journalists, he told me what had brought him to Cyprus.
My mandate is to strengthen the relationships between Canada and all member states of the EU. Cyprus is part of the EU, and also Canadians gave 28 of their young men who lost their life protecting the peace in Cyprus, and so Canadians are dreaming of the day when the people of Cyprus will agree together to build a united country.
Now, you have a lot of experience in federalism. Do tell us about that in terms of Canada and how you can bring that to bear when you come to a country like Cyprus and you're talking to stakeholders on both sides of the island.
The United Nations resolutions are supported by Canada. They call for a federation in Cyprus. There are many models and ways to build a federation. We are not short of ideas on the island of Cyprus, I see, and we Canadians may share our experience, but of course at the end of the day you need to design a federation that will be well-shaped for Cyprus.
Do you think we have the expertise here on the island to do that? Because if you don't know how federations work in many other countries, and there are so many examples across the world and they're all different, how do you tailor it to one that will work here in Cyprus?
No, I feel that enough people have a sense of what to do. It's a bit a mystery for me why then it's not done. And I don't think time works for you. I don't feel that if we wait 10 or 20 years more, it will be easier than in 20 years than it is now. So I hope that politicians will find a solution, will agree on something that will be able to submit to the both communities with one text agreed by all leaders.
If we ever get to that point, how will the communities on both sides be persuaded, because presumably it will go to a referendum, that they should vote yes for this solution?
Well, last time one of the two leaders did not agree with the text, and so his community voted against. Assume that they agree on a very balanced and solid solution. Both of them would sign a joint declaration saying, the two communities, please vote for that. And then I think would be in a much more solid situation to have a settlement that will be agreed by both communities.
You've spoken to NGOs on both sides today. What did they tell you? Because they mostly are the people who are trying to cross the barriers, bring people together. Were they optimistic?
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding between the two communities about what the other community wants. And if it was clarified, maybe they would discover that the gap between their views is not so huge. Maybe they are much closer to agree than what they think.
And you're also going to be talking to officials here. Now, what sort of information will you be looking for from them? And are you expecting to be asked your opinion and your suggestions?
Canada cannot solve it for the people of Cyprus. The solutions must come from the people of Cyprus and your leaders. But through dialogue and exchange of views, maybe Canada may play a positive role, and would be very pleased if it was possible. And it's why I'm so pleased to be on your beautiful island today and tomorrow.
Stéphane Dion, Prime Minister Trudeau's Special Envoy for the European Union and Europe.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
My next guest was in Cyprus last week to talk about road safety. She is the director of the Monash University Accident Research Centre, also known as MUARC, in Australia. Her name is Professor Dr. Judith Charlton. Judith, tell me about how you came to be in Cyprus to talk about something that we talk about an awful lot here, and that's our pretty appalling record on road safety.
Sure. I'm here at the request of the Australian High Commission, who has a strong passion and interest in road safety in this country. And I'm here also because last week we had a meeting, a round table, and a signing of a memorandum of understanding between two organisations, my university, Monash University, and the European University of Cyprus. We have mutual interests in injury prevention in general, but in particular in road safety, and this is what has brought the two organisations together.
So what does the Memorandum of Understanding actually entail? What will you be inputting, if you like, to what we're doing in Cyprus?
There is an intention or a plan to do a couple of general sorts of activities. One will be to look for commonalities where we can collaborate on research projects, specifically in road safety. And the second, also with a road safety focus, will be to look for opportunities for training. So for upskilling of people who work in the area, perhaps policy managers in the road safety space. And so we are planning indeed for a conference, we're calling it a conference, later this year that the university here will host, but we will co-host and collaborate with the European University of Cyprus on.
Now, you talk about training policymakers. What about training drivers? I mean, in the UK, for example, you have the advanced driving course, which I don't think we have, certainly not widespread if we do have it in Cyprus. And this idea that perhaps people who have been driving for some considerable time get into bad habits, so a little bit of retraining, an occasional boost, if you like, can put them back on the right track so that they are safe road users.
Well, road safety policy really needs a framework that is broader than behaviour.
Yeah, sure. If the policy isn't right, then the drivers are at a disadvantage anyway.
Yes.
But bearing in mind that you're going to be tweaking the policy, hopefully,
Yes.
with this MOU,
Yes.
what about this idea that drivers should perhaps not retake the test, but certainly refresh themselves?
Sure, and certainly that would be one of the strategies that we should, as policy people, have in our toolkit, so to speak. But I think the most successful road safety strategies have been ones that have been that have had a more of a systems approach. In Australia, we call it a safe system approach that's been accepted for quite some years now, and our strategies are built on a safe system approach. Safe system approach has grown out of a framework that Sweden introduced to the world some 20 years ago, I think, in 1998, if I'm not mistaken, by Professor Klaus Tingvall, who interestingly came out and became a director of our centre, so we know about Vision Zero and what it has to offer. The concept of Vision Zero is that the road user is highly vulnerable. The driver, the pedestrian, the motorcyclist are highly vulnerable, and they can't withstand crash forces. So that what we need to do is design a system that protects them. On the one hand, we know that drivers make mistakes. They often do. Most of the time they're compliant, or at least in my country I can say that most of the time they are compliant, and they try to be. But we're humans and we make errors. So we need to be able to design a system that is the road structural system, the vehicles that people drive, and the speeds at which they drive, and how we manage those speeds need to be set in such a way that if people do make mistakes, it doesn't cost their lives.
But let's talk about, you said, the vehicles, the speed at which people drive.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of, for example, speed limits, certainly again in Cyprus, I don't know about Australia, were put in place when cars were very much less sophisticated than they are now.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have all the features that you now have, and it was almost hard to get up to the speed limit that was, whereas now, coming away from the traffic lights in even second gear, you're probably at the speed limit and you can't even change into third. And then you've got all these safety features in cars that drivers, I think, have become aware of how they should use them, so it's much safer, actually, isn't it?
Well, it is, and if you look at crash statistics over a long period of time, I've been in this game for close to 20 years, and if you look at the fatalities and serious injury rates, they certainly have come down tremendously in this country and elsewhere in the world, at least in the Western world and developed countries. And we've done that through attacking the safe system on each of those different pillars, if you like, both improving vehicle safety with new technologies, as you described, many of which the driver would not be aware of, and that's probably a good thing. We've done it also by making our roads safer places. One of the things that we're doing in the state of Victoria, spent a lot of money putting wire rope barriers down the sides of highways, because it was recognised when we look at the crash stats that many of our fatalities and serious injuries are from run-off road at high speed, and wire rope barriers prevent those run-off roads into hard barriers like trees and so on.
Can I ask you something that I've often thought about, and that is that could it be that we are somehow deficient in how we teach people to drive? Because I have this theory that if people were taught to drive according to the prevailing conditions,
You're spot on.
they wouldn't need so many traffic lights, so many speed limits, so many road signs, so many other things, but they're taught, do this, do that, don't do that. They're not taught to think. And the conditions, if it's wet, are different from if it's dry.
Yeah.
So if you were taught how to assess the current conditions and drive accordingly, I think there are places in Germany where they've done away with all traffic lights and all road signs, and fatalities and crashes have dropped dramatically.
Yes, it's true that we need to look at the way that young people are taught to drive. It isn't just about the skill. Skills can be picked up very, very easily. It's about those subtleties and complexities in driving, making the right decisions and the complex perceptual decision-making that needs to be made. That's why there's, in most countries as well, there's a very high crash rate amongst those learner, not so much the learner drivers, but the first year out, we call it probationary drivers. And I'm not sure if you have such a system here in Cyprus, you do. But many countries have a system whereby it's called a graduated driver licensing system, which endeavours to gradually allow the novice driver to be more exposed to the complexities of the road environment. But certainly driving to the conditions is something, I think, that we could use an awareness campaign on.
What else are we missing when it comes to looking holistically at road safety? Probably the problems are much the same all over the world. Mm-hmm.
Well, as I say, and as you point out, holistic is the really important thing. I think way too often we are in blame the driver mode. We see mistakes and we blame the driver. But if you take a safe systems approach, you say, well, of course, they're humans. They are going to make mistakes. We expect them to be compliant, but they are going to make mistakes. It shouldn't cost their lives. And so designing the system, the road system, so that if they are fatigued, if they lose concentration for a moment and run off-road, it's not going to cost their life because there's a wire rope barrier there to gently nudge them back onto the road. It's also about encouraging people to buy safer cars, to expect that all cars that are available to them are 5-star standard. Not everybody is aware of that, and
not everybody can afford it at the moment. But if you look over the years at how the safety features of cars have improved, yes, and how many of them are now standard features even on the smaller vehicles, yes, then it really isn't an issue anymore.
It shouldn't be. In fact, I just got some news hot off the press yesterday from the Australian New Car Assessment Program, which was explaining that one of the least expensive vehicles, certainly a moderate to lower price vehicle on the market, had just won the highest, well, certainly a 5-star, which is an expectation these days, but the highest score of a 5-star safety rating. So you're right. If you look and if you know, if you have an expectation that you want to go out and buy the safest car possible, it's there and it's at a moderate price.
We've been talking to Professor Dr. Judith Charlton, Director of the Monash University Accident Research Centre, MUARC, who was in Cyprus recently to talk to our people here at the European University and the other stakeholders about road safety in Cyprus.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the 4th series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
Earlier this week, Professor Maurizio Serracini was on the island, brought over by the Italian embassy. He gave a couple of talks. Well, it is, after all, the 500th anniversary of Leonardo da Vinci's death. And, of course, Leonardo very much part of the cultural heritage of Italy. The professor joins us now to talk about what he was talking about, because it's really about science and how you apply that to art. The professor has a background in biomedical engineering and a little bit of art history too, but how do you bring the two together?
Well, the idea dates back to the mid-70s, when by chance I bumped into my former art history professor. I was studying art history together with engineering at the University of California, San Diego, way back then. And I bumped into him in Florence. And he was the foremost authority on Leonardo da Vinci. And I remember he asked me, can you use any science to try to find out what happened to the lost Da Vinci mural, The Battle of Anghiari, in the Hall of the 500 in Palazzo Vecchio? And since I was at that time back in Florence, and I was the only Italian citizen with a degree in biomedical engineering, there was no job for me. So I said, I will give it a try. And that's how I got involved in applying science to works of art.
And you did find the mural. How did you do that?
I can tell you that I started in 1975 to look for the mural. At this time, or I should say the last time that I did some work into try to find it one way or the other, or to prove that it's there or not, that was 2013, when we got very close. We even found speckles of colors behind the Vasari's mural on the east wall. But unfortunately, on one side, it was not enough to prove that indeed we did find the Battle of Anghiari. But on the other side, we were forced to shut down because there was a petition sent out saying that we were doing damage to the frescoes of Vasari and we should be stopped. It goes without saying that not only was not true, but surprisingly enough, you're looking for the highest form of art ever achieved by Leonardo da Vinci, and the contemporary Leonardo da Vinci call it the school of the world. So imagine what kind of masterpieces he must have achieved, even though we know he did not finish it. And for all throughout this year, since 1975, the researchers never was on the financial side of Italy, so we always found sponsors to pay for the research. Nevertheless, we found so much antagonism by the community of art historians especially. For some reason, they take for granted that either it's not there or it's been destroyed or so badly damaged that it's not worth finding.
But you're convinced it is there, and you've found the evidence even in those tiny specks of colour. Exactly that.
And so the question that remains open, and I don't know if I will be lucky to take up again the research, because that antagonism really got me a lot of, you can call it enemies, that didn't want the research to come to an end. I mean, to bring final results in that sense. And so I can say, yes, I know I'm on the right side of the two walls. I'm on the east wall I'm referring to. I know that must be there. I have not found in all throughout 40 years now nothing that could prove that the painting was either destroyed or we are in the wrong place. And so my question is, why in the year of Leonardo 500th anniversary don't we bring this research to an end?
There may well be, though, in the not too distant future, technology that will enable you to perhaps take photographs of the wall showing what is behind what. So it might take a little bit longer, but surely very soon those sort of technologies will be able to be applied, because you've been using new technology all the way through your career. Do tell us about some of the other works of art that you've studied and how you've been able to make them accessible to people with these screens that they can see through what's behind.
Well, indeed, as what you said is right. As a matter of fact, I'm still working on a prototype of a portable instrument that could scan the wall and generate a very high-resolution map to prove if the painting is there or not. So, yes, indeed, that is the way to go. I had the privilege to study many works of art, many masterpieces, but since we are in the year of Leonardo, let's talk about the works of art of Leonardo that I studied. And it's amazing to me, as a man of science, how little we know about Leonardo as an artist. Because hardly 3, maybe almost 4 of all the paintings, there are not too many. Art historians say anywhere between 15 to 18 works of art attributed to Leonardo. But only this 4, let's say 4 of them, have been fully studied by science. So, at this point, it's fair to say that we really don't know how he painted it. And I don't see why we should not go to solve these mysteries, fascinating mysteries. After all, we recognize him as not only a genius, but such an incredibly talented, genial artist. So, I thought that the privilege I had to study about 4 of them, and then I said, well, okay, you saw things that nobody has ever seen it before, because you had this privilege to study the works of art using technology that could peer through and see behind the surface. And so then I said, well, but this should be shared with everybody, regardless of the technology, that I used. And so I thought of something very simple, like a tablet or a table, that all you have to do is just wipe off with your fingers the image of the surface of the painting, and then layer after layer, you just go inside the painting. You uncover, basically you go back in time, and you see the genesis of the painting, starting from the support all the way to the surface. And this simple way, simple means because all you have to do is just wipe off your fingers on the surface of either a cell phone or the tablet. I saw kids, even elementary school kids, they were so pleased, so happy, because that stimulated their curiosity. And ultimately, that's exactly what you want. You want to engage them with games, if you want, with surprises, so that they can feel that playing with works of art is wonderful, it's cool, it's fun. And this could be the beginning of creating an awareness for cultural heritage and for culture for them growing up through their lives.
And cultural identity, of course.
Bravo.
One last question. You deal a lot as well with art crime and fighting looting and fakes and so on. Now, this is hugely important if you think of the amount of crime that goes on in the art world. But am I right in thinking that not everybody is thrilled at the idea that you would like to, in a sense, test for authenticity all the major works of art out there?
Well, if we talk about art crimes, we have to talk about from looting to a grey market, which is the art market. And the crimes are increasing in quantity and types of crimes, and the bad guys are there to make tons of money because they know there are no rules, basically, in the art market. Now, there is a misunderstanding that even for investors or collectors or buyers of works of art, they think that as long as you find the art historian who will tell you this was done by Leonardo, that's all they had to know to buy a real Leonardo, take it home, and have convinced that they made a huge investment, not only in culture but also money-wise. But the fact is that first you have to prove that the work of art is authentic. and that you need science. And obviously, this idea that science could move in and start screening what is on the market, that scares off a lot of people, because there are a lot of people who simply don't want any rule, so that they can pretend that they know, and the art market today is based on trust only. So you could spend hundreds of millions and based on the word of an art historian, who, by the way, legally is not even responsible for what he writes legally, because it's an opinion. An attribution is an opinion legally.
So that goes against the scientist in you, very obviously. It's a fascinating topic, and he wowed the audiences here in Cyprus. That is Professor Maurizio Seracini, who was talking to me during his visit to Cyprus earlier this week. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.